let me know. Thank you, Jim, for that introduction. I appreciate it. And thank you all for joining today. This should be what I consider a relatively spicy topic because it is relatively controversial on kind of the items that we want to talk about. And I think for those that might be a little bit older, we'll start to, the message today will resonate a little bit with you because there was a time before the internet. And when we think about how we got here, we're starting to see some similar alignment with the way AI is being consolidated and the types of AI that's being delivered to the masses. So you'll see some common themes from 30 years ago compared to where we are today. And hopefully it'll be fairly provoking. I definitely encourage you guys to engage, ask questions. Feel free to interrupt me if you'd like. I know Jim's going to be monitoring the chat sessions to make sure if there's a question that I can answer in the moment, I'd be happy to do that. Otherwise, there'll be definitely some opportunity at the end of the presentation for a little bit more of a dialogue. So as Jim mentioned, my name is Todd. I'm the co-founder of GridLight. We are an AI platform company. So everything that we talk about today, there's a reason why we're talking about it, because we want you to be thinking beyond what is currently in front of you when it comes to the way you leverage AI. I do have a 30-year background in cybersecurity, so I'm currently serving as a CISO for a number of organizations as well. So I do have a pretty strong privacy security background, and some of that comes into play in the way that I perceive AI and kind of where some of the risks are with the way it's being consumed today. So a couple of different vantage points, but happy to be here today and happy to share with you my talk. So we'll just go ahead and dive right in. So let's talk a little bit about what the world, as far as the world that AI is building. And we think about, this technology and how it arrived on the scene about 5 years ago and how transformative it has become for all of us. When we think about our day-to-day activities now, just like in the old days when we think about email and how did we ever live without email? That's kind of the statements we're seeing about AI. How did we live in a world without this capability? It's very transformative. It's provided an acceleration in a number of ways. It's optimized the way we do business. It's optimized the way we do research. It allows us to have more of a thoughtful approach to the things that we search for out in the world. But there's some challenges with that. And so I'd like to open the door here with just a question in just a minute. But when you think about AI, what happens when the most transformative technology in human history belongs to almost nobody? So let that sink in for a second. Then ask yourself that. Okay. And now apply that lens to what we're doing with AI. And let's get into it. So think about our daily footprint with AI and where we're at today. And a lot of this is fairly common knowledge at this point, but I think we're starting to see people really start to inspect how is AI already becoming invasive in our lives? And what about AI is actually taking hold? And it's everything from credit score and loan approval to college applications and how they're scored and ranked. I think anybody that is currently looking for a job can acknowledge the fact that with the world of ATS systems where an AI evaluates your resume, there's a high probability your resume will never see human eyes because AI is making some decisions on their behalf to determine whether you get past that gate or not. So we're already seeing some of this stuff have a dramatic impact on the way we do things. And the old ways of doing things, being able to reach out, supply a resume, get some conversations moving forward, all of that is now being handled by AI, for better, for worse. And again, from the guise of we're trying to accelerate the business, we're trying to help filter out some of the inefficiencies in our lives to provide a more streamlined approach in the way we do things. Again, for better, for worse. So when we look at how AI is already injecting itself into your lifestyle, these are some of the areas where it's having a dramatic impact, whether you know it or not. And so it's pretty significant just on the surface what this is doing to us as a society. So when you take that and you think about, okay, all this technology, again, when I think about the old days, pre-internet days, hell, even think about the beginning of the internet in the late 90s. When we think about the wild, wild west opportunity that the internet provided us, anyone could register a domain. Any one of us could start a business on the internet and kind of have confidence in knowing that we're all in this together, right? That people have choices, people have options. We're competing against options. And the variety of availability that you had at that time was dramatic, right? Anybody could get anything. Then we started to see things coalesce. And it became the situation where things got gobbled up, things got acquired, websites started to die off, opportunities started to coalesce into singular items. We ended up with the big three, the Google, the Microsoft, the Amazons. If you think about how much you do on the internet today, how much of those three vendors are applied to what you do? They own it all. And with the lack of choice comes lack of control. So when we think about AI and how we apply that same logic, around 65% of AI compute is controlled by only 3 companies. Again, we're limiting ourselves. It's either these 3 companies or nobody. So you're kind of at the mercy of what they want to say and what they want to do. When we think about the model providers, the top 5 serve billions of users. Just 5 model providers serve the majority of the users that are involved with AI. So think about that. Think about the lack of flexibility, the lack of versatility, the lack of control. We're being fed things from a very specific point of view, whether we like it or not. And that's unfortunate for us because we don't have a lot of choices. We don't have a lot of variety. We don't have a lot of options. When we think about the AI that's currently running on infrastructure for the enterprise, it's owned by 10, literally fewer than 10 organizations. So I think throughout this experience, you're going to see things have already started to coalesce in a very rapid rate to becoming very limited in our ability to have options, to have choices, to have flexibility. And that's a challenge. And it's only going to get worse as we continue to allow these entities to own this space on our behalf. And so I think it's time for us to kind of take a look at this and say, is this the future we want for ourselves? Is there a better way? Is there something else we could be doing to give ourselves more flexibility and more options than just to be able to choose from one of 3 and that's it? So that's what I'm here today to kind of talk you through. Now, what this is not a technology talk. So I'm not going to talk specifics around how AI works and the under the hood technology, et cetera. This is really about understanding the space as a whole. So this is really about power, accountability, and resilience. So I'm going to be applying my talk to these types of areas. We're not trying to debate whether AI is good for you or bad for you. That's not really the point. I'm not trying to generate fear. I'm not saying you should stay away from AI. I think AI has its place, and we should embrace it within certain parameters, right? The guardrails that we want to wrap around these. But my focus is really on what's the risk to us as a society and as a business owner or as an enterprise of having limited choices, of putting all our eggs in this basket. What have we seen in the past that applies to this concern? Like not just AI, what are some of the disruptions we've seen just in the last year that dramatically impacted our ability to be productive? We're beholden to an entity that we no longer control. So we'll be talking through some historical reference points just in the last 12 months that kind of point the finger at this concern that we don't have a lot of resiliency. We don't have a lot of redundancy. When things go down hard, we're pretty much, debilitated at that point. So they come back up. And so the AI industry is kind of taking this same track. It's ignoring all of this resilience and all this redundancy and these options. And again, as things coalesce, if one of those vendors goes down, we're all affected by that. We don't have another choice. So let's talk about how we got here. When we look at AI and historically, how did we get here? Well, unfortunately, the mode is really infrastructure. And there's 3 barriers that lock us into this AI dominance motion. We think about the big 3, right? The compute. We know that companies have spent billions of dollars in GPU clusters, all of these data centers that keep getting spun up. And the investments that are in that are to own the compute. So when you type in a query into Claude or ChatGPT or Harvey, there's a whole infrastructure behind the scenes that's crunching away at that and providing you the answers that you expect to see. They've spent billions of dollars into that motion, those data centers. And with that kind of resource, with those kinds of resources, it makes it difficult for anyone else to try to compete in that space unless you've got significantly deep pockets. So people just don't even try. We just say, let them do it because obviously they've spent the money. I just don't have that kind of capital to be able to do that. We think about the data. There's been instances over the last year where some of these bigger providers have been caught out. Claude's a great example. They had to settle out a massive lawsuit because they were basically vacuuming up proprietary data into their environment and not allowing people to be credited for that. So think of all the authors that recently got paid, right? So they're able to hoover up all of this information on the internet at scale to provide that understanding that the AI gives back to you when you query it, for better, for worse, right? That's how they build their models, is based off of that vacuuming effect of the internet. And we think about the talent, right? The fact that we have a shortage of AI researchers, right? Or they're only concentrated at the high-tiered companies. That doesn't leave a lot of room for independent assessments, for people to take a look at what is the impact AI is having on our society in a much more objective way without some sort of an agenda, without having to say, yeah, I work for Claude and I'm here to tell you AI is great kind of thing, or I work for another firm and everything's fine. Reality is they have an agenda behind that. They're not really looking at it objectively. And we probably won't know the impact for another few years as society continues to consume this. So these downstream effects are still not really well known or well understood. We've also seen this coalescing. Like I mentioned before, when the internet was young, we saw a lot of different players in the space. They all ended up getting bought up and consolidated, and this, dust ball of solutions became a galaxy of only a few. And just in the last 5 years, or even up to this point, 6 years, the big tech has acquired over 400 AI companies. So this gobbling up effect, eliminating your competition, buy rather than beat, right? So the idea is, why would I want to develop something when I can just buy you out? And absorb what you've already done. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't allow for us to have a lot of flexibility and a lot of versatility and a lot of variety in the space, because as soon as something comes online that seems to be awesome, it gets gobbled up pretty quickly. I'll give you an example of the Claude bot. If you guys have been following that in the news, that solution hit the wire and it blew up pretty significantly over about a 3 to 4 day period. And then within a week, the founder of that solution was immediately hired by ChatGPT. So was taken off the market immediately because they were seen as a threat to some of these other solutions. So that acquisition strategy helps kind of temper the variety of options that we have available. And I say temper, I mean, it really stomps it down, because as soon as something cool comes up, it gets gobbled up and becomes part of that portfolio. The acqui-hires, so we think about when you acquire an organization, it usually comes with some terms about the talent pool. So a lot of times we see situations, if you've ever been through an acquisition, if you've ever worked for a company where somebody's been bought out, there's a brain drain that occurs. You buy up the company and then a whole bunch of talent walks out the door. Well, companies have realized that needs to stop. So what we're doing is we're taking people off the market, absorbing the company and keeping the competition from hiring this type of talent. So again, there's this hoarding of resources to prevent the competition from catching up by maintaining and keeping those resources through an acquisition. We're also seeing some investment strategies around VC funding that actually looks at companies from a position of acquisition rather than independence. What that means is when they look at their investments, it's like, is this company going to be around for 5 or 6 years, or is our goal to get them acquired so we can get an early payday? So it's creating this ecosystem of short timers, people that blow up on the scene and then immediately get acquired and go away, become part of the dustbin of history. There's paydays associated with that, but nobody is going long. That long strategy is limited to the bigger entities that have the capital to keep moving forward and crush the competition underneath them. So we're seeing some of this, again, coalescence. It's just happening at a much more rapid scale than we've seen before. And it's going to continue to happen, which is going to leave you, the consumer, with less options. So now we think about how businesses typically depend on AI, and it's kind of interesting because there's been examples of this in the past where things have changed. So if you've ever tried to use API calls into other services, and maybe you've built a business around that, maybe you have a particular solution that relies on an API call to say, ChatGPT or Google or one of these other entities. If they decide their mechanism, which we've seen time and again, it will break your business. Maybe they make a fundamental shift that shuts you down. Right? Maybe there's an API that gets discontinued. We've seen this happen. They deprecate an option that you relied on as a business, and now your business is basically destroyed because of that. We've seen this time and again. So we think about how previous, like Facebook and some of these other solutions in the past, have changed some of their API structure, and it broke a bunch of applications in the process. So either they have to re-engineer their solution, or they have to just go away because they can't keep up with those types of changes. If you're using an API today that you've been approved to do, and then all of a sudden tomorrow they feel like that's not really appropriate anymore, Microsoft has been known to do this. They claim that you're now violating their new updated terms of services. You could be completely shut down, right? So what was good then might not be good now, depending on how the wind blows within these organizations. So it's created this situation where we've got a challenge with trying to build a business around this existing stack because we don't control the stack. Someone else does. We're just kind of riding their coattails and hoping that they're not going to change on their side enough that it breaks what I'm trying to do. So you can see how there's some control aspects to this, right? They control a lot of this, and we're at the mercy of these vendors. So governments, there's been a lot of talk around legislation trying to govern what AI is all about. And unfortunately, as always, governments are relatively slow to kind of keep up with what's going on. They have a tendency to be a little bit late to the party. And so when we look at what type of legislation has been passed, the EU is a little bit further along than where we are here in the States. But even then, it's limiting itself to how AI gets used, not who owns AI. Meaning that, who controls the data, who controls the narrative. They're not governing that. They're governing you and I and how we use AI. So there's some challenges there with the way the government perceives this. Now, there has been some stuff in the news recently between the government and, say, Claude, Anthropic, on trying to get them to play ball with what the government wants to do with their technology. And so there's been some of this friction that's been going on, but it has to do with the fact that we live in a capitalist society. It's free market. These businesses can do whatever they want and however they want. And as long as they're not creating a very well-defined monopoly, they can kind of do what they want to do. So China's a little more aggressive. This is more about access to what's been going on in AI versus market competition. And some of these more, I don't know how to put them, but the governments that are a little bit more nosy about how you're using the solution, that's kind of their focus point. It's like, we want to know, we want to have access to what people are querying. We want to have access to the data that they're creating using these solutions, so that and how our users are doing this, which violates privacy all over the place, but that's just the nature of their society. So when we think about how these regulatory frameworks typically work, they're designed for multiple options in the same market. But in this case, they're not really designed for just three. Right? So to me, it's like, we need more. We need better competition in this space. And unless we try to change how we're doing things with AI, we're not going to have that option. Again, it will be the big three. There will be no other option moving forward. So let's talk about how this has happened before. And some of these things, if you guys have been around long enough, you remember the banking situation in 2008, where all of the banks were interconnected. They were all sharing the debt risk. And when that started to collapse, we had a global financial crisis. So this too big to fail, the bank's accountable, because if you don't bail the banks out, then the whole world collapses because everything is so intertwined. We've seen this with social media, the fact that we have specific things like TikTok and now X and some of these technology stacks that are really focused on social media. It became a situation where we've now had kind of a mental health crisis. People become dependent on this social interaction technology, almost to an addictive state. In fact, the government is currently investigating whether this is an addiction problem for our society to have such access to this type of social media capabilities. Cloud computing, back in the day when cloud first came online, again, you had the pick of the litter as to which options you want. Now, again, just like everything else, it's coalesced into three providers. 65% of the market is limited to the three. So the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts, those are your only choices. Yeah, you could probably go to Oracle. You could probably go to some of these other lesser markets, or if you're in APAC, maybe Alibaba, which is bigger than all of them combined. But the reality is those are the three big that most people think about. And as a result, it creates single points of failure, and it's at scale. And I'll talk through some of the things we've seen in the last year that you might remember, where certain aspects of these different three providers had a disruption. And when that happened, there was a massive impact on our ability to be successful and our ability to continue to stay productive. So AI right now is this, it's becoming more of a monopoly. But when you think about their control, and really, it's like, will this continue the case? Unless something big changes tomorrow, I think we're already headed down this path, and it's going to be a little hard to dig ourselves out of unless we start making some choices and the way we want to try to consume AI as a society. So what does concentration mean? When you coalesce these into these big three, what's the impact of that? Is it better service? Better reliability because now it's in somebody else's hands? Well, let's take a look at that. Right. To us, concentration creates a systemic risk at every level, at an individual level, at a business level, and at a society level. When you think about the individual, you're losing privacy. I think every one of us here, probably when we talk to Claude or ChatGPT or any of these other cloud-based solutions, before we hit enter, we might have one little pause moment where we say, am I sending something that's going to get out there? Is this really appropriate for me to tell this system, send a document full of data that I may be concerned with? And sure, there are some assurances that, no, it's fine. When you pay for an account, it stays within your tenant. Really? Is there transparency enough for you to know that? Or are they just telling you that? Who validates that? Who makes those assessments to confirm that these solutions are not exposing your data or using your data to train on other systems? We've seen this a few times in the news recently. If you guys remember, the CISO director recently got called out because last summer he provided some data that was considered sensitive to a public version of ChatGPT. Somebody that should have known better in the security space got caught out doing this. So it's one of those things where it's a matter of convenience over concern. And as a result, we lose that ability to have privacy. We lose the kind of lose the ability to have the autonomy on how we want to use these technology stacks. At a business level, we become dependent on these systems. I know a lot of companies that have invested in some of these chat prompt capabilities to accelerate their business. Now they become dependent on it. We've lost the ability to be creative and to be originators of our own collateral. We're now just tossing it over to something like Claude and say, build it for me. And whatever you, I hope it's right, right? Because a lot of times they don't even kind of validate what the receiving is correct. And then, obviously from a societal perspective, this is creating a challenge. We're seeing it every day, right? The fact that AI is, supposedly the excuse for why a lot of jobs are being lost right now, right? We're having some erosion because the way AI has been tuned and tailored, it's controlled by those big three, and therefore what you see is what they want you to see. And you're losing the ability to have a more objective viewpoint when you start to use these technology stacks. Let alone considering that these are single points of failure, right? When these things go offline and that we become so dependent on, it disrupts our business in a very dramatic way that we've never seen before. When you lose email, okay, it might be an inconvenience, but there's other ways to communicate. But when you lose capability through AI and you're relying on that AI capability to be up and running for you to do your job and to have a business, you stop, everything stops. So there's also this opacity problem that we're seeing with AI. A lot of times when these decisions are talking in the framework of like, okay, I'm using a chat prompt and I'm doing some stuff. But when you think about how AI is integrated into other areas, such as the hiring aspect, like we talked about, right? If an ATS system rejects your resume and it never gets before human eyes, are you able to appeal that decision? Are you able to hold AI accountable to making a mistake? I know in my world as a CISO, one of the things that I'm constantly reminded by is that it doesn't matter how good these AI tools are. There always has to be a human held accountable to decisions that are made in a security strategy. I can't sue a ChatGPT or a Claude for giving me bad advice on how to manage my security program. I can't hold them accountable for some mistakes that are made. But as a human, I am accountable. So if I'm giving you bad advice or I'm giving you a bad decision and something happens where maybe you get breached, well, that's on me. I'm accountable for that, right? So there's this decision tree, right? This ability to hold someone accountable that you don't get with AI. So a lot of these times you can't appeal these decisions because most of the time you don't even know they're occurring. When you get rejected for a loan, and AI is the one that tells a loan officer to reject you. And a lot of times they don't even see it. It's just automatic. How do you have any kind of explanation? How can you hold them accountable to that decision tree? It's difficult to do that at best, right? Being able to explain how AI comes to its decisions has been a challenge since day one. There's been countless examples of where Anthropic and OpenAI have both said, we have no idea how this technology can. We don't know how it made that decision or how it had that conversation. We see this in hallucinations. When AI goes off the rails and starts giving you, Shakespearean English and starts going down the dark ages stuff, it's like, what? How did this even happen? And a lot of this stuff can't be explained. And so we need to have more accountability and more research done into how are these decisions being made? How are these things evolving and growing so that we're aware of where this stuff's coming from and how we validate that. So as we talked about, right, the inability to appeal and the lack of transparency on how these decisions are made really means that you have no legal recourse to fight against any of these adverse decisions. And this is something that's being discussed in the halls of, when it comes to things like healthcare and diagnostics and who has to, who gets approved for loans and who doesn't. There's been some legislation that has been in place that says the AI cannot be the sole responsor for why you get denied either coverage or loans. A human being has to make that decision. It can be advised by AI, but AI is not allowed to be the authority in that. And I think that's the right approach, right? We always have a human in the loop. You hear about that a lot, right? As long as a human stays in the loop, we can control what AI does, but we're getting further and further away from that as time moves on. So we think about the data concern and how, when everything you feed these AI technology stacks ends up in the ether, ends up in the cloud. And there's a lot of times where this information is taken advantage of. It's either monetized, it's analyzed, it's definitely being stored, and it's being used to train additional models with the guise that it's improving what the responses need to look like. I get it, right? That makes sense. However, it's creating its own little scenario where we have concerns, right? How accurate is it? Should this stuff be monetized? How much should I be sharing with an AI solution that I don't control? I'll give you an example, and you probably heard this in the news. We've seen countless examples recently of people having relay AI and having an emotional attachment to a conversation with what amounts to a bot. And through that has created some pretty tragic scenarios. We've seen situations of horrible things happening to people that get emotionally involved with these technology stacks and then make a decision, right? Whether it be self-harm or whatever. This is unhealthy for us, right? And it's something that I know the AI companies are trying to ratchet down on. But the reality is, I don't think that's something they can fully control at this stage. I think those guardrails are long past due. When you also think about intent and what you intend to do with these technologies, we've seen where other vendors have decided to cooperate with law enforcement so that if your query seems a little bit off, maybe you're just doing research on a topic with no ill intent. That information gets reported to law enforcement, whether you like it or not. So this idea of surveillance, the thought crime that's coming into play with some of these technologies, concerning to a lot of people. And what it does is it creates a situation where you are now more reserved about how you use AI, rather than embracing it and acknowledging that this can be beneficial to you and your business. It's creating a reservation situation where it's like, I'm maybe a toe in and a toe out. I'm not fully committed to AI because of all this uncertainty that's wrapped around these concerns that I have. And just like everywhere, like when you think about the terms of service, most people never read it. When was the last time you read a terms of service for some of these technology stacks that you use? Probably never, right? And even if you do, it's full of a bunch of legalese that's hard to follow, hard to understand exactly what they're doing with your data and exactly what the intent is with every time you engage this tech stack, what it's going to do on the other side of it. So these are all concerns that have prevented people from fully embracing AI because of the lack of transparency around these items. We talked a little bit about the business risk and the dependency on this particular stack. Again, we think about all of the different businesses that have been built out, right? Cloud infrastructure, as we mentioned, you've got three choices: Amazon, Azure, or Google. When you think about the foundational model, you've got OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google, right? So you can start to see a trend here that the way businesses have built their technology stack is around specific vendors. And if those vendors fail, that's a single point of failure for us. And so each one of these is concerning because you're putting all your eggs in one basket. And the challenge is what happens when that basket goes away? At a standstill because I don't own any of that. There was a time when we had things on premise and we had full control over what was going on premise. If it went down, it only affected us. Nowadays, everything is so SaaS based that when that system goes down, thousands, if not millions of people, right? And that's concerning when you think about the supply chain. So now this is what's interesting. As a CISO, one of the things that I've noticed in the last year is that a year and a half ago, the conversations around AI took up about 5% of my time. In just that last year period, it's now 95% of my time. Almost every conversation I'm having with my customer base is now about AI and how do we get our arms wrapped around it. And it comes from a couple of different ways. The first way is tech creep. When you see how AI is brought into the business, it's somebody that has a personal license for another technology and they want to use it for work purposes. It's the age old shadow IT concern, right? But in this case, it's shadow AI. That's a pretty traditional vector, and we're familiar with. What we're not really able to control is the existing investments in the stack that we had last year are now having AI functionality built into the product moving forward. And in a lot of cases, this functionality is turned on whether you like it or not. So think about Google Workspace and the Copilot solution with O365. Yeah, it wasn't there. Today it is. And you really don't have much of a choice. It's integrated into the product. And so, it's hard for my customers to grapple. Wow, this wasn't here yesterday. Now it is. What do I do about it? Do I sanction it? Do I allow it? Is it safe? How does it work within my ecosystem? Is this something I need to be worried about? Is it now siphoning company data into this ecosystem that I now have to worry about? So it's created a whole new set of headaches because of this lack of ownership and this lack of understanding of what is this technology designed to do and what shouldn't it do? Can I turn it off? So these are some of the areas that are concerning to businesses. And again, it turns into this: it wasn't here yesterday, it is here today. And now what do we do about it? Because it's not like I can say it's sanctioned or not. It's there whether I like it or not. Regulated industries, this is something that's been very interesting to watch because you talk about tiptoeing into AI already. If you're in healthcare or you're in finance or you're in government, if you're in anything that has a regulatory requirement like HIPAA, PCI, ISO or SOC 2 and CMMC, things that require data control, you're pretty much ineligible from using AI fully, right? This, by law alone, you're not really allowed to share this data with AI. So there's limits even in these spaces for how much they can embrace the AI technology. And a lot of this is because of the fact that this stuff goes up into the cloud, and once it does, they lose control of it. It goes everywhere. And a lot of these big vendors will not sign a business associate agreement because you have to do a certain amount of business with them before they'll do it. So if you're not spending 10 AI, they're not going to sign a BAA, which means whatever you send them, they have the right to do whatever they want. And if that data gets exposed, they're not held liable for that. So again, it prevents these businesses from taking full advantage of this capability because of those concerns. We think about the breach and some of the data exposure, right? This is a liability at the enterprise level. We've seen it time and again where certain information was shared and then exposed. And even though it wasn't necessarily the enterprise that did it, they were directly affected by it. So whether it be, business plans that got out into the ether or blueprints for a certain type of system that is proprietary, the stuff gets shared, and the next thing you know, it's exposed. And a lot of times these people don't, when I say these people, organizations don't realize that the AI vendor that's involved is treated as a sub-processor under their compliance framework. And that has a very specific risk management tied to it. If it is a sub-processor, there's a due diligence that you're expected to go through to confirm that they're doing everything correctly. It's the supply chain concern. A few years ago when solar winds got popped and then there was a massive downstream effect, that's basically what we're talking about here, right? For every AI vendor that's involved in your business, that's another risk that you've got to worry about what's happening with your data. So it's becoming this sprawl of concern on how to get my arms wrapped around this technology that's moving at light speed. It's not going away. This thing is continuing to show up in the business. And then, this is kind of near and dear to my heart because I am a big believer in privacy and I'm a big believer in objectivity when it comes to the information layer. Just like anything else, you're at the mercy of what these technology stacks want to recommend and show you, right? So if you ask it something and it's not objective about its response, it's going to shape the way you see the world, right? And we're already seeing this with things like with deepfakes and some of the concern around, the way politicians are being modeled in AI and making it look real. It's getting harder and harder to determine what's real from what's been AI generated as we continue to get better with this iteration. And so, as I say, those who control the information controls the narrative, right? They're showing you and telling they want you to know and what they want you to see. And so this lack of objectivity is for society because it's creating a society of people that are misinformed based off of the output. Now, is this AI specific? No, this is not really anything new. We've seen this with search engines. We've seen this with bias around these technology stacks. AI is just the latest to really bring this to the forefront about how truth can be shaped based off of who you're getting it from. And so the challenge is that there's no real governance around this. And so this is a problem, right? It's kind of the wild, wild west as to what they want to show you. So I hope all this is starting to coalesce into something that you understand that this is the hidden risks that people don't think about when it comes to AI and some things that we need to be asking better questions. Is this the right approach? Is there an alternative? Is there something else that we can do? So let's talk about historical examples. And this is, again, within the last year. And you guys probably remember a lot of these because they were pretty big ticket items when they happened. So Cloudflare went down in November of last year, and it took down services everywhere. It was sitting in front of everything. And the two big items that I noticed the most, ChatGPT and Claude. And when you think about how much your business might have relied on those technology stacks, where you're like, hey, I've got to write deliverables. I need Claude to be available. All of that stopped. Everything stopped because of a technology that sat in front of it. So that dependency and that reliance on a single point of failure caught a lot of people out, right? They didn't realize how much they depended on this technology when one side of the stack falls down. A month earlier, Microsoft, right? They had a misconfiguration that caused a global outage. This thing affected all kinds of services, up to and including ground operations air operations within Alaska and Hawaiian Airlines. These guys couldn't fly because of this disruption. We put so much faith in these technology stacks to be viable and be resilient, only to find out that they're really not. And a simple DNS change can create a havoc when you think about it. So now when we think about the blast radius of AI, when you start to integrate some of these capabilities, these single points of failure into these more critical systems like power grids and hospitals, these things go offline. That's pretty dramatic, right? You talk about an impact, that is pretty significant. And so imagine a hospital going down. how much healthcare would be denied from that. So let's take the cloud example, right? Imagine if that impacted a hospital and took all of their diagnostic tools offline immediately. That means I've got people that are practically dying on the beds because they're not getting the right healthcare because of a single point of failure. So again, this all adds up when you think about the risks, and this is something we need to be thinking about as a society. So what does the path forward look like? I know I've been kind of spelling some doom and gloom, but let's take a look at, okay, well, what should be happening? What can we do here? And it really comes down to 4 areas: diversification, sovereignty, transparency, and ability. Diversification, having more options, having a variety of solutions I can choose from so that I'm not relying on a single point of failure for my business or as an individual. Sovereignty over convenience. Right now, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I get a little frustrated as kind of a little bit of a warrior in the past, that when I talk to people and I say, do you believe you have the right to privacy? Half the audience says no, half the audience says yes. And when why not? They're like, well, my data's already out there. It's already out in the ether. There's not much I can do about it. Doesn't mean you should be okay with that. You should actually be upset about that. Every time it happens, you should be upset that that happens. This idea of it's convenient for me to use this technology, right? It's, hey, I don't want the hassles of worrying about what's happening with my data. I just want it to work. Okay, I get it. But is that really the right thing? Is that something that convenience should sacrifice your privacy? I don't believe it should. I think we can have both. I think have convenience and privacy all in one stack. Transparency, how is AI working? What's going on under the hood? How is it making the decisions that it's making? What's happening with my data when I give it to these technologies? That transparency is, in my opinion, mandatory. Right? If you don't know how this stuff works, why would you invest in it in the first place? That's my take on it. And then interoperability, being able to have, again, goes back to options, being able to have multiple solutions rather than a single dependency, so that I'm not locked into a particular vendor. And I'll give you an analogy. Generally speaking, there's 2 schools of thought when it comes to your productivity suite. You either have you either have Microsoft or you have Google. Once you make that choice, you are locked in. It's very difficult to migrate from one to the other because of how they've got you hooked. That's not interoperable, in my opinion. I should be able to go both ways. I should be able to have options in one. I want a little bit from here and a little bit from there to make up my stack. Well, that's not how the world works. It's either all or nothing when you invest in one of these technologies. So in my opinion, again, we're becoming dependent on single points of failure, which can create a situation where we've been lucky in the past. We've only had minor outages, but imagine a massive outage and what that would look like to society. So as an individual, you have rights. As I mentioned before, when I talk to people about their privacy rights and they kind of give up, it's like, you need to know your rights. You need to know that there's legislation out there that's designed to protect you. GDPR. See, there's a lot of state agencies that are actually passing privacy laws right now, up to and including biometrics and how biometrics data is collected and managed by an entity. So you have rights. You just need to understand what those are and understand where AI is headed. And so, become an advocate. I don't know how often you talk to your congressman or your senator, but it's important for you to engage and say, look, if we don't get a handle on this, things are only going to get worse before they get better. Making sure that we have better transparency about how the data is used and what kind of governance there is around models. What was used to shape these models? How are these decisions being made? Being able to explain these things, making sure that there are standards in place so that when you're using a tech, you know exactly how you're getting the answers back. It's not this black box in this gray, smoky area that has no transparency. And then being able to advocate for organizations that are doing AI accountability work. There are organizations out there that are all about this. I'm just a mouthpiece for this kind of stuff, but there are people out there doing a lot better work than I, right? Leaning in and helping hold vendors accountable to some of the tech that they're developing. So, when you think about it at a business level, we always tell people, like, build like the vendor is gone tomorrow, right? If somebody went offline tomorrow that you depended on, what would that look like for your business? So again, if Google Workspace went down tomorrow and disappeared, could you function after that? So when you think about AI, think about it from the point of view of, do you want control or do you want someone else to control it? I highly advocate that people take a look at on-premise AI, where you have more control. So think about having the capabilities of some of these more well-known platforms, but on-premise. Think about the power that gives you. I can share sensitive information with this system without worrying about it going off into the ether. I can take advantage of this technology and understand it because I can crack it open and look under the hood. and analyze how is it making these decisions and hold the tech more accountable because it's in my control. Taking a look at model agnostic architectures, meaning that the model is not something you should be dependent on either. You should have the flexibility to hot swap things all day long. Why should I want to lock into a particular model that may not be the best fit for me? I want to have a tech stack that allows me to swap that stuff out, right? So that if this financial model doesn't work for me anymore and I have another one that's better, I want to be able to just plug it in and keep on going. When you think about how you work with these different companies, the negotiating around data processing agreements is important. So making sure that you have control over the data that you're sharing with these technology stacks. I know that when you sign up for Claude at a Teams license level, there's additional elements of privacy that you get, but it's not 100%, right? They'll tell you that, yeah, it's your data. We don't use it to train our models, but they actually use it to train the models that are working for your company. So they do use it for that purpose. It's just a little bit of a gray area. So making sure that you have true contract agreements with the different providers, which means you might have to do a little bit more business with them to get that assurance. So that's why I say there's an alternative, right? If you don't like that, maybe consider something that's a little more on-prem friendly so that you don't have to worry about this negotiation structure. When we think about the supply chain, we talked about how this AI is showing up in the tech stacks today. It wasn't there yesterday, it is today. Making sure you understand what that is and map that out. So when we think about, okay, all the different components in the supply chain that I have to now worry about that I didn't worry about yesterday, those are things that you're going to want to understand so that you know when this stuff fails, what's the blast radius, what's going to impact me. The other thing we're seeing is this trend around open models. So there are plenty of open source models out there that you can take advantage of to play with and to grow from when it comes to how you consume AI. And a lot of people think that, well, commercial models are better, right? So if I want a really good model like Gemini, I need to pay for it. That's kind of what my thought process is. A commercial model is better. Reality is that might have been the case last year, but yet last year was kind of the inflection point. Now you can get really good models off of Hugging Face, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with that site. You can download open source models, and they're almost, if not better, than commercial off the shelf versions of these models. And so I've actually posted a site here, vellum.ai, which is a great benchmarking site that will give you data points on here's the models that we benchmark that are available to you and how they compare to some of the commercial models. So if you're curious about, efficiency and speed and processing and what they're good for, it's a really good site to use as a resource to get a better understanding of how these models are going to benefit you. For policymakers, again, this is the area that really needs some focus. Regulations really need to come in. The tech is moving at light speed, right? I think somebody recently told me, actually somebody told me today that AI is, as far as AI is aging at the same speed as a dog year. So for every year, it's a 7-year standard. So literally in 6 months, it's already a year as far as AI is concerned. So every 6 months, we are moving at light speed, which, as we know, is a challenge for regulations because they're always behind. And if you've got something that is visible today, 6 months from now, it's going to look completely different. How are you going to regulate that? Right. So this is only going to continue to get worse. So the government needs to act now. We need to be thinking about what kind of legislation will help protect the consumer and the business from this coalescence, from the lack of opacity, right? And the control aspects of this. So we need to make sure that we're kind of holding our government officials accountable, but there's some things that need to be done at a regulatory level that could benefit us all. And then when we talk about the the distributed alternative, I've already mentioned this and kind of hit it on the head here, on-premise AI for regulated and sensitive workloads. For companies like hospitals and financial institutions and regulated bodies that cannot embrace AI because of the sensitive nature of the data that they handle, on-premise AI is the only way forward. It's really the choice that they have, which is not a bad thing. That just means that this is a different approach than what we're used to. We've had this 20-year run of pushing people into the cloud, and now AI is coming back down into the on-premise world. So we're seeing a reversal of what we're used to. Being able to have things that can share intelligence without sharing data, right? It's important that you can have telemetry going back and forth to make the system better, but it doesn't necessarily mean I need to have data that's being trained on these different models. Making sure that switching from these different vendors is appropriate and that vendor lock-in is illegal. Again, we talked about this before, right? It's not competitive if I start with a vendor and I have no choice. I can't get out of that vendor and go a different way because I'm completely locked into their complete ecosystem. And then make sure we have that democratic governance structure. So making sure that AI should be for the people. It's what it was designed for. It's designed for humanity. We should be able to take control back. and make sure that if it affects us as a society, we should have more control and more say in what it does. And this technology exists today. And I'm here to tell you, as a somebody that co-founded all of these principles, what we stand on. We know privacy is the utmost importance when it comes to AI. We know that you're going to want control. We know that you want the flexibility to use it however you want to use it without worrying about, being restricted and being limited to what you're doing. So this tech exists today. All that's needed is the will to move it forward. The belief that this is the path forward is what matters. So let's talk about the choice in front of us. And again, I like to use this analogy. It's just as a reminder. Imagine if in 1995, only 3 companies in the entire world own the internet. What would that mean to you? Well, all websites would be hosted on their stuff. All email would go through their system. All data would be governed by their terms of services, and all innovation would be filtered through their approval. Sounds pretty draconian. Sounds very dictatorial, right? We've got dictatorship. That's what's happened today with AI. That's where we're headed. This is what you're giving up. So the freedom of choice, freedom of options is all pretty much a challenge for us right now if we don't make some changes, unless we can make some different choices. So, when you think about what can you do as an individual and as a business, obviously audit your organization's dependency stack, evaluate whether your current AI vendors have the right sovereignty provisions, engage with policy developments in your sector. So engage with your sector and try to help build AI strategies around policy enforcement, advocate in your organization for this approach. And then again, continue to explore, always be curious, look around, see what's out there. You do have alternatives today, especially when it comes to your privacy and your rights. There are options out there for you, even if it might not look like it, there are. So that's pretty much my presentation for today. I'd love to keep the conversation going. Hopefully this was thought-provoking. I'd like to open it up for questions at this stage, if you guys have some things you want to ask.
Yep, there's a few, but compiling, they compiled themselves. I didn't have to compile anything. They just added to the chat. Sure. One is maybe not a question, but Eileen Weathers posted a link out to the Federal News where Hegseth is having some debates about military use of Anthropic or other AI. I don't know, maybe any opinions or insights into that?
Yeah, this challenge that they're right now. It's a specific thing like Anthropic. Anthropic is not willing to say no.
Right. I don't know if it's just me. You're breaking up. You weren't breaking up at all before. I don't know what happened. You're going in and out a little bit.
Can you guys hear me okay now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Some kind of click. There's some kind of clicking. I don't know what it was.
But I'm good now, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this comes down to the government's desire to have control over their AI capabilities, and almost to the point where they need some things that can operate offline. And they're not getting it from something like Anthropic. Once you cut the head off and you say, okay, here you go, you don't have the power that you've had before. So there's some dialogue happening at the government levels around what can Anthropic do for the government and in relation to containing its data and helping it be, kind of more independent. But I don't think that's their business model. I think in order for them to achieve that, it would require a massive shift in their business.
All right, cool. Thanks for the insights. Question from Aritra Paul. Just like we have the competitive acts to discourage the abuse of dominant market positions, do you foresee something similar being applicable to these AI companies in their near future, especially in order to promote more diverse AI ecosystems? And as you're thinking of your answer, the way that Microsoft is putting Copilot in everything and Google's putting in everything, it reminds me of the 20 years ago or 30 years ago when Microsoft was putting Internet Explorer everywhere, and they're like, "Hey, you just have to use this one." What are your thoughts on that?
I would hope that we do see some of that, like that the competitive acts would be updated to include AI monopolies. But unfortunately, history has shown us that it really comes down to who lobbies the hardest, right? We've seen situations where Amazon has been accused of being a monopoly for years. Has any of that changed? Not really. And so my hope is that, yes, people will start to investigate this and say, we need more choices. We need to make sure that we don't have these monopolies. But I don't think it's going to happen fast enough. before we're already too entrenched with these vendors, which is why, I say there are technologies out there like GridLight that can do this today, that give you a competitive option, right? To have something different. A lot of companies don't survive long enough to be able to achieve that goal without being gobbled up, right? So there's a strategy that they have to keep the competition off the scene as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, question from Eileen Weathers. Companies have rushed to create infrastructure to integrate AI, including creating leadership positions, including the head of AI, chief AI officer roles. What do these newly created roles do in terms of integration, governance, outcomes? What are people doing with those roles, and
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I have seen it kind of cross the spectrum a little bit on exactly what these roles are designed for. In some cases, we've seen a lot of our organizations try to build some sort of an AI governance program. Like, how do we use AI ethically in our own business? How do we evaluate AI solutions before we adopt them internally? And unfortunately, this is normally fallen to the CISO community, or the CIO community, try to validate and vet. But what they're doing is they're carving off a new governance position, such as the chief AI officer, to be responsible. Kind of in the same vein, we see chief data officers, chief privacy officers, chief risk officers, right? They have a specific function, but what I have seen these guys doing mostly is looking at the ethics behind using AI, the transparency, the validation, making sure. If you're an AI company, there's a different point of view there, right? If you're the chief AI officer, it's your job to have governance as a first and foremost, meaning that to build AI technologies has to be done ethically. And so they're the ones that hold the team accountable for making sure those guardrails have been implemented correctly. Yeah.
All right. Kenny Khan just makes a comment on vendor lock-in. So, vendor lock-in can't ever be a vendor. It can't ever be a vendor issue that I got locked in. It happens because of customer's choice and what they choose to use. So if I built my stuff just on you and that was my choice, that's on me.
It is, and it's not. So the vendor lock-in comes from, I chose this vendor for a specific reason. But when that reason, when I feel like I'm being gouged, or now the price has become unobtainable and I want to switch, sometimes the cost of migrating away is more expensive than just staying put. That's the lock-in we're talking about. So as I mentioned before, say you're a Microsoft client and you've been a Microsoft first, all of a sudden you decide, you know what, Google's got a better offering, I want to go that route. That migration path to go from one vendor to another is almost impossible. And so that's what keeps people sticking around, right? What is that you get locked into that concept and you'll never leave, because it's easier just to stay than it is to move to a different provider. Yeah.
Yeah, that move from one vendor to another. The way open source tries to do is by having open standards, open interfaces. I know there's things like the MCP servers and A2A and some other. I might be naming the wrong three-letter acronyms, but there's some slight push to have some things that are open. Do you see anything that's being built that is making it easy to switch to something else? Like if I'm on Anthropic, do you think I could easily switch to Gemini or to self-hosted just by changing an AI endpoint or an API endpoint?
I mean, the experience you get is not one-to-one. And that's the challenge we have, is there's not really parity between ChatGPT and Claude, right? My usage of each of these tech stacks is uniquely dependent on what I'm looking to do.
Yeah.
Right. If I want to vibe code or something, I might use a Claude, or in this case, GridLight, right? We can do that as well. Claude, ChatGPT, I might use for a different purpose. So it really comes down to this idea that these tech stacks have a certain function for how people use them. And I'll give you a reason how I believe that, because think about the number of subscriptions you have to different streaming services. It's the same concept. You might have Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Disney. They're all kind of doing the same thing, but the choices you have within those platforms determine whether you keep it or not.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's no one ring to rule them all, and when it comes to tech stacks. But that open source is, and the reason why we're kind of talking through how option for businesses is that they are becoming closer to parity with commercial, right? So the same kind of experience I can get with a commercial model, I can get with an open model. What down to is support. And this has always been the case with open source.
Yeah.
You can get stuff free all day long, but when you want to file a ticket and get support, it's like, hey, you get what you pay for. You're not paying for it, you're not getting anything. So a lot of businesses kind of frown upon open source because like, who are we going to call when it breaks? Right. And that's kind of what keeps them away from it. So models that are open source are a little bit different because of the way they're integrated into the tech stack, but it's still the same old problem, right? People kind of shy away from things that aren't supported. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to take a jump cut away from technology questions. I do have one that, and you had this one before as a previous speaker. You may have a different answer this time. a career question. You know, and it could be, you know, sometimes I ask, you know, what would you do? Advice would you give to your current self, give to your 20-year-old self, but it could be advice for anybody. I mean, it's because sometimes you have people that are in college right now or just out of college. We have us seasoned tech professionals, but any career advice that tidbits or tech stack, I don't know.
Yeah. I know the last
advice to give to us here in this technology career space.
Yeah, and I know the last time we spoke, you know, I still believe in the art of the hustle, right? Hustle, network, get out there, you know, kind of continue to pursue building your network, expand your horizons. At this point, I think the biggest upskill, you know, AI is not going away, and we are seeing people's jobs get replaced by AI. The reality is upskill is now the new buzzword. Get familiar with it, be comfortable with it, understand how it works, understand how to build for that, because that's what's going to differentiate you from people that are not doing that today. So it is a threat. It's an existential threat to the workforce at this point, and it's affecting both rungs of the ladder, the top and the bottom, right? The lower level people coming in are being replaced, right? Because it's like, why do I need an analyst when I can do this with, you know, an AI tech? The older people like myself are being aged out because it's like, why do I want to pay a $300,000 resource when I can just use AI to augment that wisdom? So it's hitting both ends of the spectrum. But what I can tell people today is continue to upskill, continue to get familiar and comfortable with AI, find unique ways to use it, to demonstrate value with it. And that's because that's the future, right? We're already seeing titles change. Recently, I come across a forward deployed engineer title. Never heard of that before. It's a brand new title, but it makes sense. It's very AI focused. It's somebody that's helping organizations scope out what they want to do with AI. Like that was a position that didn't exist before. So we're starting to see a trend moving away from traditional roles into these new advanced roles, but they're all around AI. So that's kind of my takeaway is get upskilled, right? Embrace it, learn it, love it. Yeah.
Man, that was wild, not a wild ride, but a great ride. Different perspective because the perspective that we've been getting on AI is yes, it's coming. Yes, upskill, but on your presentation, it's like, just pick one of the big vendors that you want. That idea of maybe self-reliance, self-sufficiency. Grab something that works and have it as your own, as a tool that you can use if the mega data centers go down. You really appreciate the time you put into this. I know we didn't see or hear much about GridLight. But if you want to look into it, GridLight, I think it launched this week.
So we're this week.
Hold on, it's clicking again somehow. Your audio is clicking. I'm not sure what.
Hear me now? Better.
It's crackly.
It's clicking. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know what it's. I don't know what it can be. I don't know if it's just crackly for me or everybody.
How about now? Am I a little bit better?
It's quiet but not clicky.
Okay.
It'll be good.
Okay, good. Okay, cool. So yeah, as far as GridLight is concerned, for those of you who are interested, again, as I mentioned, we built a solution that allows you to experience AI locally in a private way, completely air-gapped. Encourage you guys to check it out, just GridLight.ai. And the idea is you can get access to the product for a couple of weeks to play around with it, see what it can do for you, and it'll allow you to upskill, because now it gives you a self-contained ecosystem that you can play with and get familiar with and control, right, without having to worry about that data going to the cloud. So didn't want to make it too focused on GridLight, but yeah, that's kind of the point, right? It's to give you guys an opportunity to take a look at an alternative to what you're used to, with more control and more sovereignty involvement.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, we know these are thought leadership.
Yeah,
but didn't want to miss out on saying GridLight a few more times.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks, time.
Yeah, thank you.
Prepping. Thanks everybody for joining. If you found this interesting and you want to send it to somebody, it's recorded. I'll have it up on YouTube probably by Monday at the latest. And if you come back to this event page that you joined the event from, you'll find the recording attached there. I'll get the slides from Tommy, attach those there as well. So a little round of applause for Tommy. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
All right. So